Do you know it's so important just to take a deep breath, get all those nerves out, shake it all out?
Welcome back, everybody. We are here to talk about surrealism.
Surrealism, the weird and the wonderful. We're going to try and condense it as much as we can. It is a big topic. So I think a really important thing to realise in surrealism, so it's the early 20th century, and it was massively impacted and influenced by the war, the First World War. And that massively influenced essentially all of the members of the surrealists that were in the war. So Breton was a poet who was heavily influenced by Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud talked all about the uncanny, the unconsciousness, the subconsciousness, exactly.
Wanting to sleep with your
mum and your parents and stuff like that, all a bit odd. And he essentially spoke about something called the id, the ego, and the superego, which is all about repressing a lot of things in your life and hiding that and uncovering it in your dreams.
I'm totally bought into Freudian.
Honestly, I think some of it does
theory.
make sense. Some of it's a bit odd, but you've got to be a bit out there to make a big impact. And he definitely did. Sigmund Freud did. And Breton was heavily influenced by Freud. So he wrote, after the war, the Surrealist Manifesto. But Breton himself was in the war as a medic. So he experienced what it was like to go through such a travesty, 40 million lives lost.
Gruesome horrors.
Horrors, and experienced it firsthand as a medic. So after that, he started writing about surrealism and something that could change from the oppressive, formalized nature of Paris at the time. So before the war, in the 1900s, Paris was very proper. It was very regimented in the sense of you kind of did what you did within your confines of your
You had your discipline and that was it.
You had your discipline and that was it. So they wanted to revolt against that. Surrealism wasn't just an art movement, it was a revolution. And they wanted to make that a thing. They wanted to make it clear that they were changing. Surrealism was coined by a poet called Guillaume Apollinaire.
Of course.
And in 1917, he wrote a play and he mentioned the fruits of imagination. And it was all about looking into the imagination and thinking, oh, okay, we're moving from the physical realm more into what we're thinking, what our mind is. The ethereal mind exploring dreamlike states of what we can uncover.
Symbolism.
Actually, funnily enough, that's one of the main aspects of surrealism. So symbolism and... what was it? I've totally blanked.
Maybe it's in your subconscious mind somewhere.
It probably is in my subconscious mind. But essentially, it was symbolism and autonomy. Automatism and surrealism. Automatism is all about automated drawing and using chance and different mechanisms that aren't structured on using your consciousness to create artwork. So symbolism, as you can expect, is creating different motifs within art that symbolize something that doesn't necessarily mean what it's meant to mean. Then someone like Joe Miro created a lot of automated drawings which weren't necessarily structured. They were more like squiggles and squares and triangles. But to him, it represented what he thought his subconscious mind was trying to physically represent.
Okay.
It can get quite heavy. But surrealism itself is a pretty massive art movement that affected so many different forms of art. It affected fashion, it affected film, it affected lots of literature. I mean, you look at album covers today, Biffy Clyro, the Rolling Stones, Muse, their album covers are surreal. They have that aspect which is really popular. So obviously, as I said, surrealism massively impacted the people of the time. And in 1936, after the war, when it started getting the heat of the movement, Dali and Breton, the two figureheads of surrealism, went to London and they did, I think it was the first international surrealist exhibition. And there, to represent how wacky surrealists were, Dali dressed up in a deep diving suit.
Oh, I know the image.
And I think he struggled to breathe, so had to eventually take it off.
He had a bit of trouble, didn't he?
He had a bit of trouble, nearly died.
Should we have a look at this painting?
Yeah, we can. So this is The Persistence of Memory, and this was painted in 1931. So if you take away the clocks, take away this weird duck-like feature in the foreground.
You think that looks like a duck?
It's actually a self-portrait. So a couple years before this, Dali painted himself, and it's very similar. If you get it alongside each other, can you see it looks like eyelashes and his nose on the left-hand side of the figure.
Is that a sort of tongue flopped out?
Yeah, you can read it as you want to.
This is his proboscis.
Okay, that's it. Right there, his proboscis.
Why is he disappearing into nothingness?
Immaterial, dreamlike state.
Oh.
So if you take away the clocks and you take away Dali himself, you look at a vast landscape. You're in the desert. There's no sense of time.
Sorry, there's an infinity pool over here.
Exactly. There's an infinity pool. No, that's a little ledge, you idiot. The rocks in the background were proven by art historians to be reminiscent of one of his hometowns in Catalonia. He's referencing something that's very personal to him in a dreamlike state. The melting clocks.
Everyone knows the melting clocks.
Everyone knows the melting clocks. Obviously, time a clock which is representing time is very structured, it's very regimented. And for us to see it melting, it kind of makes it immaterial, it makes it irrelevant.
This one's not only melting, it's draped over the branch of a tree.
But there are so many symbols within this that reference, so for example, ants. A lot of ants represent decay and death. So it's almost the death of time and how time within this space isn't existing. They're taking you out of this structured reality and putting you into a position where you don't really have to think. Essentially, Surrealism was a massively impactful movement throughout our history, and especially within the 20th century. I feel like if you divulge a little bit further into it, it would have to take a bit longer.
Okay, well maybe that's for another time. We're just going to melt off into the ether. Come on, melt away.